Today, we're going to discuss who has gained the most and who has lost the most this spring training for the Detroit Tigers. All today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Tuesday, March 19th, 2024. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. All righty. Welcome in, everybody. Happy Tuesday to all. Hope your weeks are all going very well. Best of luck in your tournament brackets. Some really exciting basketball going to be played on the men and women's side. And I'm really confident about my brackets right now. Like, way too confident. And that'll all go away in about 48 hours. But for right now, it's all that matters. And I'm feeling on top of the world with both of them. So let's talk about the Detroit Tigers. That's what we do here. Great transition. So, yesterday I know we talked a little bit about potentially this episode being a roster projection 2.0. And for a few reasons, one being that I actually don't think it's that long of a discussion to have I don't think it's a half-hour long discussion, genuinely. And so I think that the offensive side of the ball has been kind of set in stone for weeks now, to be completely honest with you. I don't think there's been any movement. Again, I could be wrong. I could be totally off base about the pulse within the organization, but I think it's pretty straightforward. And I think on the pitching side of things, there's maybe one bullpen battle, but even that, kind of not really. And then on the pitching side of starting pitching side of things, rather, it's Casey Mize versus Reese Olson and how that battle is going to shake out. So I wanted to and also there's been a few different, a lot of other people that cover the team, beat writers, just personalities, other shows, etc., have done kind of roster projection stuff over the weekend and on the off day as well. And I didn't just want to be one of, 5-6 different people that was all doing a roster projection, especially when comparing and contrasting my opinion to those already put out there. We're all pretty much in lockstep because, again, to my point, I don't think there's too many battles up for grabs. Now, there are a couple, again, on the pitching side of things, especially a bullpen spot, starting pitching spot. But I wanted to give I wanted to contextualize those battles. And I wanted to give a perspective of the entire roster while still also talking about the roster projection and the roster battles that actually are in place that are worth the conversation. And so I came with to the conclusion of kind of having this episode. We did a similar one going into spring training, right? We talked a little bit about, or we had a whole episode actually about the players with the most to gain or lose in spring training. Who does spring training mean the most to going into camp? And so I think that now is a good time with a week left. Thank goodness only a week left of spring training. I'm really tired of talking about it, honestly. We can talk about who, those last battles, right, that are being ironed out. We can contextualize those and also talk about the players that aren't a part of battles, but still have had really good springs or really poor springs and kind of put their names on the map or remove themselves from conversations, etc. So I think that this kind of, hits a lot of birds with just one stone. Really, really impressive rock we're throwing here. So I'm hoping that that's the case at least. So let's start off a couple of examples to kind of prove my point. Torkelson will not be in this episode because Spencer Torkelson, even though he's struggling in the spring and his numbers aren't good in the spring, I should say, his role on the team has not changed. He will be a middle of the lineup bat and be the everyday first baseman for this baseball team, right? Doesn't matter that he has a 430 or 460 OPS in spring training. Andy Ibanez, on the flip side, has an OPS of 1,000. His role on the team has not changed, though, since spring training game one, despite the fact that he's been one of the best hitters in the entire league in spring training, right? He's going to fulfill the same role. So that's kind of, again, contextualizing all of these. That's what we're trying to do, because I'm the person that always goes, oh, it's spring training. Like, take a deep breath. Stats aren't the most important thing, spring training numbers. So I think putting, again, it's all about contextualizing. I've said that like 80 times. Let's get into it. So I think for starters, the players that have gained the most, I think Joey Wentz has to be toward the top, if not at the top of this list. And that's not even like a stamp of guarantee that he's going to make the opening day roster. But just from where he was at the end of last season, to put himself in a position where I think he is likely going to make the opening day roster. I think if the season started tomorrow, my projection would be that he would make the roster. I think that is such a far cry from where the fan base was at with him at the end of last season. And honestly, a lot of the fans probably still are with him because, again, how much do you really hold into spring numbers? So, but I think that he has at least earned, at a bare minimum, the conversation to make the roster, if not outright get a spot here, especially because he's out of options, which we've talked about a lot. So I think that he is towards the top of my list. Alex Faedo, for similar reason, he didn't struggle nearly as much as Joey Wentz last season, obviously, but I think that if you're talking about that last bullpen spot, it's probably between Alex Faedo and Joey Wentz. I guess maybe you can throw Brisky and Will Vest into that conversation. We'll talk about Vest a little bit later. But I think that Brisky is very, very close to becoming a lock to make this opening day bullpen. I think he's probably going to be in there. Faedo, despite the fact that I think he's probably going to be the odd man out and start off the season in Toledo, I think that he has really rejuvenated some excitement and some optimism about what he can be in this bullpen long term. He certainly has for me. I've talked about it all spring. I've really liked what I've seen out of him. So those are two guys that are fighting for a spot. Again, giving my opinion on who I think is going to make the roster and not, but also giving, the hat tip to both of them for having a really solid spring. Some prospects obviously are going to be on this list as well. I think Wilmer Flores, without a doubt, has put his name on the map, maybe more than anybody not named Jackson Joe, but his was even different, right? Joe, we didn't expect 102 with an elite slider. Well, we'd expected the elite slider, I guess. I don't think anyone expected to see what we saw out of Job in that one inning, obviously, but Job's one of the best starting pitching prospects in the entire game of baseball right now. Wilmer Flores, for lack of a better term, had a down year last year. All the excitement in the world 2 years ago, and really just flew through the system and flew up prospect rankings and whatnot. And last year took a step back. And so him going out there, and I think part of it is probably just a change in mindset from a lot of people like myself. We're like, okay, well, if he's throwing like that, he's a reliever and he's a darn good one. So I think that probably helps a little bit with, again, just the context and the angle that the perspective, that's the word, the perspective of that you kind of break down his game from. But I think that he has absolutely kind of rejuvenated the excitement that was there in 2022 with him. Eddie's Leonard, another guy that obviously has gained a ton of hype this spring training. He has done nothing but crush the baseball, not only in spring. This is dating back to when they acquired him, right? So he's toward the top of that list. And obviously it's not going to earn him an opening day roster spot. But if he keeps crushing just lasers right down there in Toledo to start off the minor league season or the first half of the minor league season, what have you. We'll talk about Javy a little bit at the end of the show. Obviously, one of the players who has probably lost the most in the spring. Leonard, especially if he can prove to be maybe a halfway decent outfielder and can maybe play second and third as well, I think that that seat could get a lot warmer. I just don't think he's a major league shortstop defensively, but if he can establish himself defensively anywhere else, even if it is multiple positions, and keep, again, if he just keeps crushing the ball, that's all there's going to be to it, man. And he's going to find his way on this roster because I think this is his last option is this season. So he will be out of options similar to Joey Wentz and Zach McKinstry this year. He'll be in that situation next season, I believe. So definitely a guy who has really played his way onto the map this spring. Let's keep the ball rolling. Got a few more in the players who have gained the most category. And then on the second half of the show, talk about players who have probably lost the most this spring. Okay. We will do all of that right after this. Going to talk to y'all today about our friends over at Prize Picks. Football season may be long over by now, but the action on the floor is heating up, whether it's the tournament or the fight for playoff home court. There's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of year, so get in on all the excitement with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. This is obviously the best time of year to get in on all of this action. We have the tournament this week, this Thursday, some play-in games, obviously. Men and women's side, both going to be absolutely electric. This is one of the most hyped up women's college basketball seasons of recent memory, if not the most. So much talent, obviously an incredible draft class as well. Just going to be such an awesome March the rest of the way. I cannot wait to just rot and watch so much basketball and get in on all of this action with Prize Picks. So again, Prize Picks, use code LOCKEDONMLB. Download the app today and use that code for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate you all for tuning in and making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will be back tomorrow talking about some spring training baseball. We have 5 on the 40-man roster, 5 player previews left. That's why we're not doing any today. We got like a week and a half to get through 5. We'll get through all of them before that last trip up north. Also, as you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. And baseball fans, which is obviously all of you, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern time for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. Again, that's March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th, 7 p.m. on Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Okay, so talking about the players who have gained and lost the most this spring training, I think it's a good sign when, for me, the list of players who have gained the most is pretty comfortably longer than the list of players who have lost the most. I think that's obviously a pretty good sign for the direction of the winter and the offseason. Not that it was the best offseason ever. We've talked about that plenty. Focusing on ahead now at this point. How about Blake Snell? What a deal. Scott Boras. Anyway, so we left off. We had talked about Eddie's Leonard. I think that we're going to save Mize and Olsen for last because I think they're both on this list. Jackson Jobe, very obviously, going to be toward the top of this discussion as well. Had one of the most incredible innings of recent memory you have seen from any pitcher, really, period, nonetheless, from a minor leaguer. So I think that he's absolutely on this list. Ryan Kreidler is somebody who I put on this list. In roster projection 1.0, I had him making the major league roster, and there was a little bit of a pushback, but also some people that are really big Ryan Kreidler supporters as well. And then after they signed Gio Urshela, then it just was like, all right, well, that's just not going to happen because Zach McKinstry's out of options. He's making this team out of camp. Andy Ibanez is making this team out of camp. And Matt Vierling is making this team out of camp. And now Gio Urshela is going to make this team out of camp. So that kind of dwindled pretty much immediately. That evaporated. And I don't think Kreidler's making the team anymore. I think he'll almost assuredly start the season in AAA, despite a huge unless there is rather a huge change in the last week of the season here. But he has been phenomenal. He has been hitting the cover off the ball, really good ABs. He's a guy that has walked in the minors, which I think this front office appreciates. And he has looked so good defensively everywhere they've put him. Obviously, shortstop, everybody loves to point out because everyone loves to be mad at Javy, understandably so. But Kreidler, I think in terms of players who have just looked the best this spring, I mean, he's played so well that there is kind of a conversation about like, hey, is there any way we can justify bringing him up north kind of thing? Is there any room for him somewhere on this roster? And again, I don't think there is, but I do think that he will play Major League Baseball for the Detroit Tigers this year. And he's going to be maybe the first call if there's an infield injury or somebody goes down anywhere in the infield. I think that Kreidler, might legitimately be the first call that is made. And he's earned that. He's had a great spring. Jace Young, I think, is kind of in there. He's looked pretty good. Faced a lot of minor leaguers in spring training games, but obviously did great in the spring breakout game as well. I don't think his standing in the organization really changed substantially, so he's kind of like half on here, half not, but has looked pretty solid in the ABs that he's gotten, and I think that a lot of people are pretty excited about what he could do and if he could be in Detroit in the second half of this season as well. We'll end this part by talking about Casey Mize and Reese Olson, and this is like a good problem to have, but it is a somewhat of a problem that the Tigers do face themselves with. Mize and Olson, I think, are both on players who have gained the most. I think Casey Mize has looked better each start as the spring has gone along. This is a guy that obviously has not pitched in almost 2 calendar years competitively. And it's been about 2 years since he's pitched in a regular season Major League Baseball game. And so seeing him, the stuff, just look as good as it's looked, and seeing him slowly go deeper into games, the fastball velocity looks good, the splitter looks good, the breaking ball looks solid. Like all of these things, I think a lot of people are pretty optimistic about, if he's healthy, what he could provide this team this year. And Reese Olson has done nothing wrong. Reese Olson, outside of his first start of the spring, has been pretty darn good for all of spring training as well. So it's just, again, it's a good problem to have, I guess, at the end of the day. But it's still, I don't know, somewhat frustrating that they're not going to go with a 6-man rotation. And I don't think, maybe they put Reese Olson in the bullpen, but I don't think they want to do that either. I think they want him to be ready as a starter whenever his number is called, because inevitably it will be. And I think that that's something that I try to reiterate a lot as well. So yeah, I think those two being on there. Matt Manning's kind of half on here as well. I want to acknowledge that he has looked good in spring training, but I have never, and this is different than some other people that cover the team out there, I have never thought that there was any question that Matt Manning wasn't going to be in this rotation on opening day. And again, that's not a universal opinion. There's some people that definitely thought that was kind of that it was the Mize, Olson, and Manning competition. I just never thought that. So for me, he was going to be a 3, 4, 5 starter in the rotation going into the year. He's still going to be a 3, 4, 5 starter, even though, but I do, again, want to acknowledge that he's looked good in spring training, obviously. So that's kind of where I stand on the players that I think that have impressed the most. On the flip side, let's talk about the players who have probably lost the most momentum or lost the most in terms of, standing on the roster or role on the team or whatnot. I don't think that we've had any just flat outright, like you lost your job completely. I think that Veerling's half on here. His spring numbers are now fine because he went 3 for 3 over the weekend. And again, we talked about it yesterday. Spring training's weird, and that's why we have to contextualize all of this, because he went from like a 600 OPS to an 830 in a day. But I think that the only reason he's on here for me is not because he's done anything wrong. I don't care about his spring numbers. I think his mechanics look better. I am somewhat optimistic that he can get more at the plate than what he was doing last season. The reason he's on here is just because they signed Gio Urshela. And like objectively speaking, right, no matter how good he's done in the spring, this dude went from going to be the everyday starting third baseman to not. So like, again, it's that was, he's like half on here. I have him in parentheses on my sheet because the rest of these guys are because of performance. Well, not even one of them, not even as well, but you know what I mean? Like, he didn't do anything wrong. And just like they signed somebody else. And that's just kind of all there is to it. In terms of other players that are kind of in a similar vein to that conversation, I think Miguel Diaz probably, again, not that he's been awful or that he's completely just like everybody's opinion is just completely different on Miguel Diaz. But he is out of options. And I just don't see a spot for him on the major league roster. So when talking about players who have, again, lost the most, not that he's done anything wrong or that he's looked awful. I think he's looked pretty similarly to how he did last year when he was pretty good. It's just unfortunate that he's out of options, and I don't think they have room for him on the major league roster. So he's probably going to get put on waivers. And there's a very real chance that Miguel Diaz is in another organization on opening day, which brings a tear to my eye. That's my dog, as we're all aware. I've been riding hard for that dude since last spring training, very publicly. So yeah, that's going to be sad if and when that happens. But I think that just, again, objectively speaking, because of the roster pinch, he kind of has to be on the list as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit more performance-based, though. They got a few more there, one due to an injury and a couple more, obviously, performance-based. One big one that everyone knows we're going to talk about. We will talk about all of that right after this. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV, and it provides you with access to millions of movies and television episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On, first and foremost, but also all the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels lets you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports. That's March Madness, NBA, MLB, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos, etc. as well. So check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this one. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. Also got to tell you all about our friends over at FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on the big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 wins. It's $200 to use on the point spread, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate you all for tuning in, making us your first listen every day, as always. So, talking about the players who have lost the most ground, I would say, within the organization, just in this spring training so far, right? And we got a week left. I think that's important to continue to throw out there. Some of these can change, obviously, but again, this roster situation, I really think is I don't want to say set in stone a week and a half before opening day, but I think it's really close. We'll see what happens, but I think Wentz is going to make Wentz and Brisky will make the roster over Faedo, and I think Mize will make it over Olsen. And I think the offense is completely set. So we'll see. Obviously, a week and a half from now, if any of those are wrong, then we will talk about it very in depth on this show, as we do every day. But I think those are the biggest conversations, and that's where I would put my money today. So again, when talking about players who have maybe lost the most ground, we have to obviously talk about Javy Baez. And, his role on the team hasn't changed this spring. He's going to be the opening day shortstop. Whether it upsets the heck out of you or me, and, you think it's ridiculous and you think we should cut him. And all of this, I am on social media, right? I see all of the talk about Javy Baez. I see it all. He's going to be the opening day shortstop, despite how bad he has hit in the spring, despite how poorly he has played, really, just in general, since becoming a Detroit Tiger, specifically the last 2 seasons. He is going to be the opening day shortstop. That being said, I think that between last year and what we have seen so far in the spring, we are finally at a point. Like last season, it didn't matter how bad he was playing and how bad he was hitting specifically. Whenever people were like DFA, Javy, whatever, I would always have to come on here and be like, that's not going to happen. Like he's going to be the shortstop the rest of the season, whether you all like it or not. And while I'm having that conversation about opening day again this year, I do think that if he was to hit really poorly, right, sub 600 OPS again, the conversation about DFAing him or buying him out would actually start this year. And for all of the talk we heard about the work that he was putting on in the winter and the, what he needs to work on and the swing and the approach and et cetera, and et cetera. And we'll do the player breakdown on Javy, obviously, here probably this week. I do think that he has just looked so much the exact same as last year so far in the spring that this is actually the year where if he has a 570 OPS at the All-Star break, the conversation is actually going to start being had. And I think that when talking about as much ground as you can lose, being guaranteed the opening day shortstop and being paid $20+ million a year, that's probably the most grounding you can use. Being like, if he hits like he did last year again, he probably won't make it through the year on this team. And that's the first time we've been able to say that since he's joined the Detroit Tigers. So I think that he makes this list despite the fact that his opening day role has not changed. Okay. Now, the other members of this list, Brendan White, I have on here. That's more due to injury than anything else. So wishing him a speedy recovery. But he was a guy that I think could have played himself into somewhat of a conversation if he pitched really well of like, I don't think I ever would have predicted him to make the bullpen out of camp, but I do think that he could have been at least a little bit more of the discussion at a bare minimum. And then the last person I have on here is Will Vest. And he's honestly not even like the most, I don't know. I have Will Vest on my opening day roster. Okay. I don't think Will Vest is just like not going to be on the team. But I do think, and I'll put my caveat to this at the end of this comment, but I do think that he has not performed super well. And I think that it's at a point where it's like, is he a little bit more of that conversation, with Wentz and Brisky and Faedo and whatnot? Is, Will Vest maybe part of that conversation a little bit more than we like to give him credit for? I think there's a chance. Again, I still think he's going to make the Major League roster on opening day. And the biggest reason for that is because I don't think he's ever been good in spring training. Like, I'm trying to remember. I feel like every single year I come on here and I just seem like a huge hater, and I'm not at all. You can go listen to Will Vest player preview. I like the dude a lot. But I feel like every year I come on here and I go, Will Vest is not guaranteed a bullpen job. Like, if he struggles, he shouldn't make the opening day roster and he shouldn't be a fixture on this bullpen. And then every year he ends up throwing, 60 plus innings out of the pen. And it's like, all right, well, I guess that, there goes that, right? There was one spring, I don't remember if it was last year or 2 springs ago, where he was actually just like terrible, like legitimately a liability. Like his ERA was like over 20 or something, I want to say. And again, I don't know, spring training sample size. That could have been in 2 innings for all I know. I have no idea. But I feel like I have this conversation every year, and I feel like he just always makes it at some point in the regular season and pitches pretty well. So I'm not questioning it too much. He's another guy that's kind of like half on here, half not for me. But it is someone that I just at least want to, acknowledge their performance so far. And then the last player that I think is worth noting for here, players who have maybe lost the most, is Akil Baddoo. He has not had a very good spring, and I don't think that his role on the team completely fell off. My roster projection 1.0 was him starting off the season in Toledo, and we started that conversation back in like November, right when they acquired Mark Canha, about like, okay, well, Baddoo might not make it through the offseason because they might get traded because they have such a loaded outfield, specifically lefty outfield. But he just at the end of the day, he hasn't done himself any favors on the field with performance so far in the spring. And for a guy that we've seen crush in spring before, obviously, I think he could have made it a little bit more of a conversation maybe as we were heading into opening day. There might have been some people that were really kind of pounding the drum and pounding their fists on the table for like, let's reconsider. He's walking a lot. His swing looks good. He's hitting for power, etc. And unfortunately, he just has really struggled in spring training. So he's going to start off in Toledo again, like we expected. But I do think just in terms of again, like withstanding on the team, went from probably not, but we'll see how spring plays out, to he's going to start off in Toledo pretty much assuredly at this point, barring an injury in the last week here. So he's another one that I think is on the list, and that's pretty much it. Like I said, I think the list for players who have gained the most is longer than I think I said more names there. I'm pretty sure my list is longer, at least optically, that I have written down here. So I think that's a good sign. That's a healthy sign. Some prospects making the list on the good side of things is always a good sign as well. And I also think that mostly it's just a sign of some decent depth. So again, I know that I'm the guy that always is like, take spring training with a massive grain of salt. I fully understand that. I really don't want this to come across as like hypocritical toward that take, because I do believe that. But I think context in all of these situations matters. Context matters with everything, right? And so I that's why I wanted to paint it this way, this perspective, because I think we still talked about the roster battles. We still talked about my roster predictions, while also kind of just like cutting out the fluff of like the guarantees, which I think is most of the roster at this point. And we can kind of contextualize all of those things. So I've said contextualize more in this episode than I have in my entire life combined. I take a drink of water every time I say it. If you want a fun game at home, thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will be back tomorrow. All right, back on player previews. Got 5 more on the 40-man roster. 5 more. Then we're done. Some spring training games back to go over. I'm assuming some roster cuts are coming this week. I waited till the evening on Monday to record this, thinking, maybe some roster cuts would come, and they never did. So thanks a lot. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. Let me know what y'all think about the spring battles so far, where you kind of stand with some of these players, and I will catch y'all tomorrow, baby. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch y'all then. Go Tigers.